Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name's Perryn Keys. I'm the executive sports editor, joined today by Wilson Alexander, as always, our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist. LSU takes care of business on a unique night in Tiger Stadium. They wipe out Army 62-0. In a game that was every bit as lopsided as it appeared in the final score. LSU gets a chance to play a lot of players. They distribute carries and receptions and things like that fairly evenly. Nobody seems to get overtaxed. A few players sit out, nursing a few injuries. And there's one potentially very big injury, obviously, that we need to discuss, and we will get into that as LSU heads into the open week, followed by the big kahuna November 4th at Alabama against Nick Saban and his crew in Bryant-Denny Stadium. These two gentlemen are here to discuss it all, and discuss it all we shall. Gentlemen, welcome in.
Good morning. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thank you.
Happy to have an off week, I assume.
Oh, yes, especially with what I've got going on this week.
We'll get to that. We'll okay. Congratulations are soon to be in order for Wilson Alexander, and congrats to you too, Rab, for just being a heck of a guy. How's that?
Good job, Rab.
I'll do what I can. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
We wished you happy birthday.
And we did. We wished you a happy
sang.
29th birthday. We should not have sang.
Okay.
A bit of business here first before this thing gets all the way off the rails. If you're tuning in, you know that The Advocate has always been the number one destination for LSU football coverage. This podcast is just another great way for us to bring our great coverage to you. Subscribe if you would to The Advocate. You can get a digital subscription or a print subscription. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. If you haven't already, please sign up for our newsletter. It's a daily newsletter, but Rab handles that 3 times a week personally. To do that, to sign up, get all the latest headlines to your phone, to your inbox, to your desktop, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. As for this podcast, we'll be here, typically be here on Mondays and Thursdays. We'll be here live on all our YouTube channels and our social channels. We won't. A little programming note: we won't be here on Thursday. We'll take the day off. Some people will be peeling out of town. Some people will be hanging back to do some basketball coverage. We'll have a big basketball preview for you here shortly, obviously, as the LSU women and the LSU men get underway before long. But yes, by all means, find us on our social channels and our YouTube channels. And if you haven't, you can follow us and subscribe to our podcast via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever finer podcasts are found. So we get to the business at hand. LSU takes care of Army pretty handily. Unique setting, a unique night in Tiger Stadium, 62-0, and I think a lot of people were they gave thumbs up to both schools at the very end after it was all said and done. You saw both players from both schools go to one side, to the Army side, stand for the Army alma mater, and then come on over to the north side of Tiger Stadium for the LSU alma mater. It was a cool setting one way or the other. But as for the football game itself, I would just ask you guys this first and foremost. Rab, what's your big takeaway, if there is one big takeaway to be had from that game?
Certainly, LSU seemed, focused on the task at hand. After a long, tough stretch in the SEC, 5 straight SEC games, plus, of course, playing Florida State to start with, they finally get that open date leading up to the Alabama game, which is traditional. But they took care of business. I mean, they came out right away and didn't give Army any hope of springing the upset. Not that you figured they would. This is not the Army team that we've seen in recent past that's had some good teams, but I was mostly impressed with the defense. That they didn't give up any really big plays. Their offense has changed. It's not the triple option as we discussed last week, but it is still enough that you could miss an assignment or two and they spring a 50-yard run on you or something like that. And that didn't happen in the game. So I was probably most impressed with that the defense continues to look like they make strides. And the offense, of course, was, again, excellent.
The defensive part is the thing that's most important probably for this season, and what we are getting into in November with Alabama, Florida, and Texas A&M looming ahead, and LSU trying to win the SEC West and maybe even win an SEC championship. But to me, the thing that stood out was on a night in which USC loses to Utah and it's second straight game, and Washington struggles and doesn't even score an offensive touchdown against a 1-5 Arizona State team, a now 1-6 Arizona State team, LSU's offense just keeps rolling. You're playing Army in a team, in last week Auburn, a team that didn't have much of an offense. You haven't played necessarily the top 10 defenses in the country week after week, but it's hard to click like that week after week, regardless of the opponent, to continue to do what LSU is doing offensively. The consistency at which it is operating is incredibly impressive.
Even the 2019 team, they didn't struggle a lot, and it's all relative. The 2019 team struggles are not the same as everybody else's struggles, but this offense has not really stumbled to this point. You can say maybe the second half against Florida State, it was when they sort of slowed down. It would be the only time, though, really, that they didn't have a very, very, very explosive night. When they went to go suit up. I want to get back to the offense, but I do think that maybe the most the issue with the potential long-term impact on the LSU football team is the injury to Zy Alexander, LSU's number one corner. He picks off a pass, a sort of a Hail Mary throw toward didn't make it down to the end zone even, but he picked it off at somewhere between the 5 and 10 yard line. He's making a football play. I don't know what you can say about the guy. He didn't do anything wrong. He picked off a pass. He wants to run it back. At least in theory, there's a chance for him to run it all the way back with no time left on the clock before halftime. But he takes a hard tackle. It was difficult to tell exactly what it is. Brian Kelly discussed it only as a lower body injury. And we frankly, at least to this point, don't know exactly how difficult that's going to be in terms of the severity of the injury. So, look, let's just say that Zy Alexander forget about the rest of the season. Let's just say that Zy Alexander is not available for Alabama. We've seen lots of players go in and out at that corner position, really from the start of camp and all the way through now. Wilson, what do they do if Zy's not able to go?
Well, don't hit the panic button, I guess. Internally, don't do that, but it is a major point of concern. Zy is the only cornerback who has started every single game at corner. He hasn't been necessarily an all-SEC kind of caliber player, but he's probably been their best cover corner and the one, like I said, who started every single game. And if he is going to miss some time, which, again, we just don't know exactly what he's dealing with, the severity, there's a lot of questions still to be answered about this. But it's a major point of concern, especially because of what else is happening at cornerback. You already were without J.K. Johnson for the season. Denver Harris was, according to Brian Kelly, inactive for this game. And if anybody doesn't quite know what inactive means, that's code for, a coach's decision. Brian Kelly, some kind of discipline thing going on.
It's not like the NFL where it's like we don't have enough room for you on the active roster.
Inactives list. That's right.
Exactly. That is a coded word. Same thing for Juice Chestnut, who's been out now for 4 games. 3 games, 4 games? I think it's 4.
Oh,
because he hasn't played since Arkansas. So,
that's right.
4 games, and so same thing with him. He's inactive right now. There's no indication of when he would be quote active again. And so, and then Ashton Stamps is a freshman who obviously everybody had a really good camp and made his way up the depth chart, but he's been dealing with an injury the last couple of games
and did not dress against Army. That's
exactly.
Right.
So Brian Kelly said hopefully that he's coming back and practicing during the bye week. But right now, you're at corner looking at Sage Ryan, who they moved out there in the middle of the season after he started in the first game against Florida State at corner, a position that until this year he had never really played before. And while he's done a good job, that's certainly a little bit uneasy of a feeling to have somebody without a ton of experience at corner out there. And then Jeremiah Hughes, who played the second half against Army, and LaTerrence Welch, a sophomore. So if it's a very precarious position to be in, at a position that was already the point of concern on this team, is in a really tough spot. If they were playing the second half, they brought in 4 transfer corners this year, right, to try to reload this room and all of that. They were playing the second half against Army without any of them.
That's right. LSU's passing defense has improved statistically speaking. They've improved. They allow now 238.5 yards per game through the air. That's still 9th in the SEC, and it's gotten better week by week. But it's important to note, obviously, that Auburn And certainly Army, we're not talking about the cream of the crop in terms of, no offense, but not talking about the cream of the crop in terms of passing attacks. Those are two passing attacks that obviously struggle. Now you're talking about going in to face Alabama, which certainly is not as explosive as it's been over the past several years with first round quarterbacks and first round receivers and everything. But I think it would be fair, don't you guys think, to say that Jalen Milroe, the one thing he does do is throw a pretty deep ball. And so now you start to get a little worried. Rab, if you were the LSU defensive coordinator, which you most certainly are not, but if you were, and let's go for now on the assumption that LSU will be thin in the secondary. What do you do to try to help those guys out?
Boy, it's a really good question. I think you're just trying to. I guess I try to focus on. This is going to sound funny. I would try to absolve Deuce Chestnut or Denver Harris or whatever they've done wrong and get them out there on the field. That's what I would do. Okay, that's bad, but
selective discipline.
We need you to. Are you really sorry? Okay, go play. Like your parents told you at one time or another. So I don't know. I mean, they're in a tough spot. Like Wilson, it's very sobering to think that all these transfer guys, none of them were available to play against Army. And again, you didn't need them against Army, but Alabama, to me, for what I've seen, it's not the most consistent offense in the world, but they can hit the big play.
Yes,
and they just had to hit a few. Their offense goes in the tank, and then they'll hit a big play. They're not. They average. Their offensive numbers are pretty on average fairly pedestrian.
They averaged 3.3 yards per carry in that win over 10. Give them all the credit in the world. They were down obviously at halftime and then came back and really took it to Tennessee last week. But they averaged 3.3 yards per carry. Alabama did, and that's very un-Alabama-like, obviously. I would just say, I mean, and again, this is not revelatory, but the best thing you can do is, hopefully, if you're LSU, hopefully that front seven continues to improve as we've seen them improve. See if you can't rush with four, see if you can't stop the run with your front seven, and make Alabama sort of be honest through the air. Anything to add?
But that's going to be the key, getting a pass rush. That's the key for this whole defense all year, is getting a pass rush to protect the secondary. That's going to be even more important. Harold Perkins, Mason Smith in particular, like these guys need to have really big games.
Are you going to go? You don't have a lot of bodies. Are you just going to go risk going with just four defensive backs a lot of the game, which they do a good bit, and maybe try to drop Perkins or somebody else out of the linebacker core more into coverage to kind of help, because we've seen him kind of play correct me if I'm wrong, a nickel type role this season.
Harold, yes, he has been. That's what he's been really solidified in. Somewhat since the Florida State game when they moved him outside, but even more so since they went to the 4-down front. You look at his snap count and like his snap numbers, it's overwhelmingly in the slot playing the nickel. Since I guess when they went to the 4-down front was after the Ole Miss game. So since Missouri, Army, and last week against Auburn, a lot of play in the slot for him, which has really been beneficial in a lot of ways. You try to throw a swing pass out to the flat, good luck. Harold Perkins is probably going to track that down. He generally has a couple tackles for loss on those kinds of plays. And they've been able to bring him off the edge and get pressure as well at times. But it is he's gotten a lot better in coverage, significantly better in coverage over the course of the season. But it's still a situation where if you're going to have like a really fast receiver and he's trying to play straight up man, that's a problem, because Harold is one of the most athletic people in college football. But in terms of playing coverage one-on-one against a wide receiver who's going to be really shifty, like that's not a matchup that you love, and so that would be kind of that.
I'm sorry, or you fear that maybe Tommy Rees, the Alabama offensive coordinator Tommy Rees and Nick Saban, they figure out a way to scheme their formation in such a way that all of a sudden now you find Harold Perkins over a receiver who's who's running a slot fade or doing some, a deep post 30 yards down the field. I'm not so sure that's exactly where you want Harold Perkins.
No, it's not. He's done okay in a couple of those situations. There's one come to mind, I think, against Missouri. He was able to get his hands up and disrupt the play on something similar to that. It was a play in the end zone, I believe. And but it's still like not something that he's necessarily been trained on forever, of getting his head around and playing the ball in the air. One thing to note maybe about Denver Harris, and hopefully we can get a better answer from Brian Kelly on this Tuesday evening during his one press conference for the week here on the open date, is what exactly will be Denver Harris's status for the Alabama game specifically, because we know that Denver has a history of disciplinary issues. He was, I guess, inactive for the Florida State game. He didn't travel to that game at all. And while he hasn't been starting at corner, he had been available up until this game. So is this like a one-game, one-off suspension kind of thing because they're playing Army and there was something that happened at some point in the season and that they picked, conveniently picked the Army game for him to be out? That could be a situation that we're dealing with here maybe, because he, came in as the extra corner on LSU's nickel and dime packages just last week against Auburn. And he was traveled with the team even though he did not play against Missouri. And so, maybe this is a one-off thing, but we'll probably be able to get a better answer about that, on Tuesday night.
One last thing. I think the viewers might say, well, are you completely dismissing the idea that Zay Alexander could play against Alabama? No, we're not, because we don't know the extent of his injury. I will say, listening to LSU radio as I do during the game, they're doing the sideline reports, and Gordy Rush said that in the halftime locker room he had trouble putting weight on his ankle. It was a lower body injury. It's likely an ankle, and it could be a significant ankle injury. And again, that was right after the game. You got 2 weeks to try to get back, but if it's a high ankle, these things don't, as we all know, don't heal very fast. So the idea of him playing effectively against Alabama is, at this point, would appear not to be good.
If the LSU defense ends up being suspect again, which certainly is within the realm of possibility, that then, of course, means that the LSU offense has to outscore Alabama. And obviously that's something that LSU could very well do. I had proposed, or I was going to propose, that we sort of table the Jayden Daniels Heisman campaign and the Jayden Daniels Heisman race for this week and the several weeks to come until we got to Alabama. But he had another fine game. He got out obviously after the first half. Damage done. No need to play him in the third quarter and fourth quarter against Army. But then also look around the nation. Obviously, the thing that really shook up this Heisman race is what happened up in Seattle on Saturday night. Michael Penix, very, very pedestrian numbers, 275 yards passing, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He fumbled once, and Washington was very much on the ropes. Arizona State decides to go for it on fourth down, which I don't fault them for doing that, frankly. They think they can go put them away. Arizona State has a slim lead late in the second half, and goes for it on fourth down. They throw a pick six. Michael Penix leads them down to a field goal drive, and then Washington is able to put it away. One way or the other, though, the odds changed dramatically on Sunday in the wake of Michael Penix's sort of pedestrian performance. J.J. McCarthy, the Michigan quarterback, is now the favorite in terms of what Las Vegas likes. Caesars has him at plus 230. Michael Penix is now plus 280. He was minus 145 going into the weekend. And now Jayden Daniels is third at plus 300. We've discussed over and over, Rab. You voted, among the three of us, you voted for the Heisman far longer. What can Jayden Daniels do? Does he deserve to be in the Heisman? Does he deserve to be higher, lower? Where do you give us your sort of 2 cents on where everything is and where he stands?
I personally think he deserves to be a little bit higher, but I think he's not in a bad spot, considering that a lot of it comes down once again, and it's probably a broken record for a lot of LSU fans, that so much hinges on the Alabama game. How he does it. He has an opportunity for a spotlight game again. Again, if you saw him, like as I mentioned on the podcast before, we're all covering teams, and it's hard to see. I saw Michael Penix play for the first time significantly in the Oregon game, a week earlier. And it's just hard for a lot of voters to see people when they saw Jayden Daniels was likely against Florida State, when there was that one game on a Sunday night on Labor Day weekend when no one else was playing, and obviously LSU, and he did not perform very well. This is an opportunity for another spotlight game in a game that will have significant attention on the national stage, and it's kind of do or die. And if he does well, I think he's got a tremendous chance. And he's suffering, of course, from the fact that LSU has a couple of losses. I think the odds that you pointed out, and when I say this goes back to another point I've made, that a lot of voters, whether they admit it or not, want to vote for the best player on the best team. And that for them right now, for a lot of them, is J.J. McCarthy. A lot of people feel Michigan...
that out over the years.
Yeah, and a lot of people feel that Michigan is the best team right now. But you can't convince me, and I'm not just saying this as someone who covers LSU or being pro LSU. You can't convince me J.J. McCarthy has played better this year than Jayden Daniels has. You can't convince me hardly anyone. You can't make an argument for hardly anyone in the country has played better than Jayden Daniels. It's because his team is ranked number 2 in the country and is getting a lot of first place votes and is considered the team to beat in the Big Ten and likely going to the playoffs. A stolen signal or two aside, but overall, he is that guy that Jayden doesn't have that advantage, and it is an advantage if just a psychological one.
And you have to think about also who Michigan has still coming up on the schedule. There's going to be multiple opportunities for J.J. McCarthy. Michigan hasn't really played anybody yet, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities in November, late in the season, right before people are sort of forming their Heisman votes, for him to maybe really supplant him or really cement himself in that kind of a conversation, because they've got Ohio State still to play.
Oh, clearly he's got these marquee moments ahead of him as well. Those
things are available, and so when I think about the odds to win the Heisman, he's got multiple chances to have the quote unquote Heisman moment.
But it can change rapidly. I mean, look what we saw this week. Penix went from an overwhelming favorite to not the favorite at all.
What Saturday told me is that I won't be surprised at all if this race goes not only down, it goes through championship weekend. Penix, will have every opportunity, and Washington will have every opportunity to be in the Pac-12 championship game. LSU obviously still alive in the SEC West race, and then of course Michigan. Michigan very much has not played anybody yet, and we will get into that here in just a second. But yes, Michigan will, in all likelihood, J.J. McCarthy will have a great chance to make a splash against Ohio State, and then presuming that they beat Ohio State, will then have a chance to then go and make a splash in the Big Ten championship game.
But just like with Penix dropping down, this stuff is just so fluid right now.
It's very fluid right now. One thing, to me, the hard evidence, I did want to bring this up, the hard evidence says that absolutely Jayden Daniels should be in the discussion and maybe front runner. If we're just going on numbers alone, J.J. McCarthy, 78% passing. That's good, obviously. 1,799 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Okay, not bad. Jayden Daniels, 2,573 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 521 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns. The other thing, to add, a little addendum to Michigan not having played anybody, they have not played a top 25 team yet. They have yet to play a Big Ten team that's better than 500 in conference play. Their first top 25 game is not until November 11th. That's at Penn State, and then they finish up at Ohio State. So when all is said and done, before the Big Ten championship game, they will have played 2 top 25 teams, to say nothing of, not really any sort of mid-majors, so to speak, of note.
Yeah, for example, they haven't gone on the road and played a game like Ole Miss. That LSU has played.
Correct.
And LSU lost that game, but it wasn't because Jayden Daniels didn't perform at a very, very high level. The offense didn't perform at a very high level. So it all shakes out. Like Wilson said, it all shakes out. Everyone's going to get their opportunities. But Jayden has another chance. I think this shows that he's climbed back into the race enough where he's got a legitimate chance if he goes out there and continues to perform really well. He should at least be a finalist, but he's got a legitimate chance to win it at this point. But LSU has probably got to keep winning.
Absolutely. I mean, and stay healthy. Because think about last year, Hendon Hooker at this point of the season looks like a Heisman finalist.
Yeah,
maybe he was
right.
going to win the thing, and then he gets hurt, doesn't even go to New York. And so a lot is going to happen in November to determine this race. Jayden is in a great spot to be in at this point, but got to stay healthy and got to play well.
This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Please subscribe to The Advocate if you haven't already. You can get a digital subscription, a print subscription, some sort of combination of the two if you like. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do. As I said, Rab handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter, so you get all the latest headlines and the best coverage from The Advocate straight to your phone, straight to your inbox, straight to your desktop. To do that, you can sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And this fine podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever finer podcasts are found, as well as our YouTube channels, our social channels. Typically every Monday and Thursday, you can watch live, and then it's obviously available on YouTube after the fact on the Advocate's social channels. Before we get to sort of the state of the SEC West and bowl projections and all these things that Rab loves and I don't, I do want to talk. Wilson, you brought up that we probably should discuss just the LSU offense in general. It's just really sort of the overarching topic. Is this the best offense in the nation right now? Yeah, as you noted, Wilson, you looked up some numbers, and certainly the hard evidence is there for you to be able to make a case.
I'm gonna Rab and I got mentioned something about qualifying things, like we sometimes have to do it, and I'm gonna use that real quick through 8 games qualifying this. Yes, the best offense in the country without a whole lot of argument against it. Oregon would be the only one that could also have a case. Washington has a case at this point as well. But you look at it, LSU is number 1 in scoring, number 1 in total offense. They are number 1 in third down percentage. They are also number 1 in plays over 20, 30, and 40 yards, which is, I think, shows
a big development.
It's incredible how far this offense has come since last season, because we wrote about this a good bit, even in the spring practice. Again, here, how LSU was trying to be more explosive, and especially through the air in the vertical passing game. Obviously, that has happened. Last year, that was kind of the knock on this offense, was it was really efficient at times. A ton of 8 plays, 75-yard drives when they were rolling. I'm talking about second half of the season, Florida on. But you looked at those 20, 30, 40-yard numbers, and LSU kind of dropped off comparatively to everybody else. And so now this year, they're leading everybody else. They've got 67 20-plus yard plays. The next closest team is USC with 54. And to be noted, at this point in the season, a lot of teams have had a bye. Obviously, LSU is about to have one. That USC's also played 8 games like
That's
LSU.
Right. They haven't had theirs.
Yeah. And so LSU is just doing some incredible stuff on the offensive side of the ball. They going into this Army game, they were one of 2 teams with Oregon to both rank in the top 10 in rushing offense and passing offense. Now it's just Oregon. LSU dropped back. Its rushing offense is 11th now in terms of yards per game because they didn't run the ball very much against Army, but it's still right there. And, I mean, this is a group that is doing whatever it wants on the offensive side right now. And like I said earlier, it's just I think there's sort of an air of skepticism around this LSU team because they have 2 losses, rightfully so. And you got to go and do it against Alabama, and some of these that kind of a defense and on the road, that sort of stage. But I still feel like it's sort of one of those things where you have to sit back and for a moment let yourself appreciate it. This is hard to do week in and week out, and it's so yes, I think this is the best offense in the country at this point in the season, and if they continue to play that way, then LSU is going to have a good chance to win out.
I remember something Joe Burrow said late in the 2019 season that reminds me of where LSU is right now. He basically said they were performing so well, and they'd gotten so good at what they did offensively. However the defense chose to defend them was going to be wrong. If they did this, the defense did this, LSU was going to do that. And if the defense did that, LSU was going to do this. And I talked to Josh Williams after the game, and he agreed with that, with how they're playing. Just think of what they could do. And he brought this up. Just think of what they can do. Jayden has got a run pass option. He can hand off to Logan Diggs or one of the other running backs, and they're doing a great job running the ball. He can hold the ball and run, or he can hold the ball and pass, or he can run himself. That's incredibly difficult to defend. Just imagine being a defensive coordinator and say, "Well, okay, we'll key on that," but then this guy could do that, or they can throw to one of 3 different receivers, and the tight end's not terrible either. And the communication they have. Remember the play in the game? Jayden got flushed out of the pocket. Army did a good job kind of getting him off his mark at times. It didn't help, but they did it a few times. And he kind of rolled out to his left and shot-putted the ball out to Josh Williams. And he took off on, I forget how long the play was, 30 yards or so. And it's like, man, it's incredible what they can do. And again, it's a great challenge from Alabama in 2 weeks. They're a top 15, top 20 defense. But it's a very hard offense to defend, and I think, as Wilson said, I have to agree, they look like the best offense in the country.
He's got a heck of a 1-2 punch in his two receivers too. Malik Neighbors 981 yards, first in the nation. Brian Thomas 732 yards, 10th in the nation in yards receiving, first in the nation with 11 touchdowns receiving.
Get this about Malik.
He's,
probably by the end of the first quarter, if not sooner, against Alabama. I guess knock on wood for health and all of those things. Maybe light prayer candles or something that he stays healthy. But he'll 19 yards and he'll join Josh Reed as the only receivers in LSU history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons.
Pretty amazing. And he and Brian Thomas have the chance to both go. They probably will go both over 1,000 yards. Rab, I'm gonna I'll just make a note here about the state of the SEC West. Alabama's still on top at 5-0. LSU at 4-1. Ole Miss at 3-1 in conference. Texas A&M at 2-2. So it's still LSU still needs for Ole Miss to lose. We've discussed that before. Certainly, it would seem that the game at Georgia would be the most likely that Ole Miss would lose. But LSU's got to take care of its own business. Obviously, starting with Alabama. We all know that's the case, and we what else can you say about LSU Alabama? It's the big kahuna every year. It'll be the big kahuna this year. Before we get to that game, though, however, this is one of my least favorite topics of all time, but it's one of Rab's most favorite topics of all time. Bowl projections. They're out there. They're a dime a dozen. Rab, where do you? I don't want to bring this up, frankly, because it's just there's too many more games, out there on the schedule. There's too many more variables. You never know what the other team, what some other team is going to do that's going to affect this invite and that invite. But Rab, I'll just turn you loose on this topic if you like.
Well,
not where do you want to go? Where do you want to see? Where do you think LSU is going to end up?
I'm going to go to the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, but
I'm going to the Bahamas Bowl. Forget that.
This time last year, LSU had 2 losses, and they played their way into contention for the college football playoff. So if we were doing a podcast last year, we would have been talking about, do they have a chance if they went out? And they did. I don't really think they have a chance of making the 4-team college football playoff. A 12-team playoff, like they'll have next year, they would have
right in the thick of it.
They would be right in the thick of it. So, but they have a chance if they went out to go to a New Year's Six bowl game. That would probably be the best thing to do. The semifinals are in the Sugar and the Rose. So you're talking about the Fiesta, the Orange, the Cotton, the Peach Bowl, Wilson's personal favorite. Otherwise, say they drop a game to Alabama where they win the rest and they go 9-3. Citrus Bowl again, I'm thinking probably not. They just played in the Citrus Bowl and they just played.
Won them.
Yeah, I don't think they won. I mean, the Citrus Bowl gets to pick. The SEC picks all the other bowls after that. The intriguing possibility out there is that LSU and Notre Dame could meet in, say, the ReliaQuest Bowl, formerly the Outback Bowl in Tampa, or another bowl game. That would be interesting, obviously, for obvious reasons. Maybe not interesting to Perryn, but interesting to me and a lot of other people. He's like,
Well, because who would be the likely opponent?
I'm saying Notre Dame.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Notre Dame.
all right. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you said that.
LSU, Notre Dame, Brian Kelly's former school, former offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator he wanted to bring over, who's now the head coach, right? The guy who offered the job. So there's lots of interesting storylines.
I think it would be
the defensive coordinator Ed Orgeron tried to hire.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it would be a whole hell of a lot of fun for the fans. Don't misunderstand me. For fans on both sides, obviously, I'm quite certain that the Notre Dame fan base would like to get their pound
Twitter
of flesh.
would just be awful.
Which is why I'm dreading this kind of stuff.
People, I don't know if LSU fans realize that. Maybe they haven't made their minds up or not. They revel. There's a lot of people out there who revel in Brian Kelly's misfortune, or when they lose or don't play well. They're really enjoying that. So, and part of it is, to me, which is misplaced. How dare he leave Notre Dame to go to LSU. How could you do that? And that's part of it.
Well, I mean, look, to be fair to the Notre Dame fan base, that had never really happened. That had not happened since 1907. That a sitting Notre Dame head coach had left for some other, what ultimately became another Power 5 program. So, it's in some ways understandable that a fan base would be so surprised that something like that would happen.
But maybe to further discussion just a little bit, if LSU ends up in a bowl game like that, the ReliaQuest Bowl, one of these non-New Year's Sixes, it probably is lost to Alabama. Maybe it ends the season 9-3 with a chance to go 10-3 in the bowl game. Is this season a major letdown, or because it's year 2, is it okay?
It shouldn't be, but it's going to feel like that because they started number 5 in the country and had all these aspirations and were partially born out of the fact that, well, Kim Mulkey won her second year and Jay Johnson won her second year, so Brian Kelly, it's your turn. Which is not it's not a real thing at all. But if you're talking about perception, it could be viewed as a down year, and who knows what would happen in a bowl game, who would play and who wouldn't. Obviously, there's no way for us to know that, but it would be a little bit of a letdown, I think. Yes.
I think it would be considered a disappointment, not necessarily because I'm going to say something that may be semi-controversial. I think the LSU fan base, most of the LSU fan base has plenty of common sense in the sense that they would say, well, okay, look, this is the guy's second year. The only thing I'll say to that though is that I would venture a bet that a large portion of the LSU fan base, and kind of rightly so, or understandably so, would be disappointed in the sense that you've got this, what we thought was a once-in-a-generation offense, 2019 notwithstanding, this almost once-in-a-generation offense, and you kind of wasted it because you just couldn't get that defense. Yeah, they're gonna be people, I'm sure, for years and years and years to come, particularly if LSU winds up beating Alabama and wins out the rest of the way, which is no guarantee for sure. But if that were to pass, and they finish 11-2 or something like that, but they don't get the something happens and they can't make it to Atlanta, or even if they do make it to Atlanta and lose, everybody's just gonna be thinking, man, if they'd have just hung on, been able to find a way for the defense to just be a little bit better and hang on, defeat Ole Miss and all that. In other words, it will feel sort of like a wasted opportunity because you had this, as I said, this incredible offense that you couldn't quite take to the promised land.
And offense that only scored 49 points against Ole Miss, and
yeah,
the most points LSU ever scored in a game and lost. So that's going to be the season right there.
We'll wrap this up here shortly, but let's look ahead to Alabama. The early line is Crimson Tide by 7, over under 60.5. If I were a betting person, I think I would take the over. But between now and game week, between now and Monday, a week from today, if you're LSU, if you're the LSU coaching staff, and Wilson, I'll put this to you first. What are maybe the number one or number two things you really, the number one and number two objectives? We need to get these things done and sort of taken care of before we get into game week.
Well, this week is always all about self-scout.
Yep.
And so when LSU is self-scouting, the big thing is going to be what we talked about earlier with cornerback. On their end, getting a very clear picture of who's going to be available against Alabama, and based on who is available, what are their personnel packages going to be, and getting those guys, caught up. Brian Kelly, said after the game it was kind of unclear if he was just referring to Army or if he was referring to like Army and beyond, about this is who we have. Mm-hmm. And so whoever it is, exactly who they have, again, hopefully we can get as we're recording this, it's unclear. Hopefully we can get a better picture of that over the next, today or tomorrow, the next couple of days. That would be the number one thing, is figure out exactly what's going on in the secondary and come up with a game plan in order to be able to be competitive, even regardless with whoever's out there. And the number two thing would be probably with this self-scout, if you don't already know exactly what your tendencies are, then get a very good idea of them in order to come up with some things, mid-game adjustments you can make against Alabama in particular, and then Florida and A&M as well. But obviously that's the big one coming up next. And so be able to buck tendencies if you have to. And that's something that, Nick Saban this is a flawed Alabama team, but Nick Saban is a brilliant coach and someone who has, I think, always been very good at maybe attacking some of those things and exposing them and those kind of sort of flaws. And so that is probably going to be a major key as well. I think this offense can score on anybody. Mm-hmm. At this point. I'll be surprised if they don't score against Alabama. are they going to score enough? We'll see. But, be able to make those mid-game adjustments if necessary.
One thing Brian Kelly mentioned going into the Army game and was that one place where their offense is not totally elite is red zone off efficiency. I think they were in the 37th in the country going into that game, and they're improved somewhere in the 20s. I bring it up because Tennessee had a chance to put Alabama away, and they only led 20-7 at halftime. And of course, Alabama just ran them out of the stadium in the second half, 27-0 in the second half. But Tennessee had some real opportunities to be up 24-7, maybe 28-7. You've got to take those opportunities. And remember what LSU did in the first half against Alabama in 2019, right? 33-13.
Yeah.
If you get those opportunities, you have to cash in. I think that's one area, as Wilson said, that's got to be continue to be a point of emphasis for LSU in this off week.
And also, this is, if you're going to do, I don't see them doing, like their big defensive change was going to the 4-down front, and they seem to be very pleased with what they've gotten out of that to this point. So it would be surprising if in the bye week they made some other kind of dramatic defensive change. But if you were going to do anything else defensively in terms of big picture schematic, this is the week to kind of do some of that. We saw it in 2021. That was a completely different kind of season. LSU was just like, all right, well, what doesn't matter at this point? Ed had already been, fired, and they went out and they just started blitzing like crazy.
He had nothing to lose.
Exactly. They came out and they almost beat Alabama on the road in a 20-14 game. And so if they were to do anything else defensively in this, the second half of the season, the last month of the season, this would also be the week to kind of implement some of those things. But I have a hard time seeing them do something dramatic because they've already seemed to feel like we've settled on a defense, and then they seem to like what they have defensively. But again, this would be the time to do that if you're going to.
Plenty of work to do for LSU here in the open week, and plenty of work for us to do in the meantime. We will be back Monday. As I said, we will take Thursday's podcast off. We've got some momentous things coming up. We're working on basketball. Most of us are working on basketball anyway. Young Wilson is not. Wilson, this is his last podcast as a single man. We had to have to mention that and tell him congratulations in advance. We will be there. Wilson, by the way, is inviting everybody. He's going to pay the bar tab himself. So just send the bill to him. No,
Two open bars.
Wilson has found himself a great young woman from Terrebonne Parish, so we're very happy about that. We wish him the highest order of congratulations in advance, and then we will obviously do so when we come back here a week from today, a week from Monday. In the meantime, LSU's obviously got plenty of work to do to take care of Alabama in 2 weeks. We will be here for all of it. We will be here for the rest of football season, LSU women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball, every Monday and every Thursday. By all means, subscribe to The Advocate. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Sign up for the LSU newsletter. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And if you haven't already, subscribe and follow us, and make sure you stay up to date with all of our podcasts. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and wherever other finer podcasts are found. And obviously also on the Advocate's social channels and YouTube channels. So with that, we will wrap it up. We will call it a week. And we will see you here in 1 week. For Wilson Alexander and Scott Rabalais, my name's Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.